Hello everyone. I would like to do a problem with you. It's on page 584, Programming Exercise 1. This is at the bottom of 584, Programming Exercise 1. We're going to start with something very simple with this. Is write a C++ program that declares an array alpha 50 components of size of type double, and initialize the array so that the first 25 components are equal to the square of the index variable at this, and the last 25 are equal to 3 times the index variable. And I want you to output this thing. So if you read this, I mean, you broke this down. You really broke this down, and based on what we just talked about in this last 5-6 chapters with it. Can you kind of delineate the separation? There's probably the initialize function is 1. All right, it's one function, and inside that function, you're going to actually declare the first 25 and the last 25. The second function is an output of this. So again, let me just walk you through and how we would actually do this. So let me just pull up a blank notepad. You put your, if you're going to compile this through your Microsoft Visual Studio with this thing. This is problem. This is number 1, page 584, and you still have your skeleton in this thing. If you recall, pound include IO stream, and then you have your user namespace, std, and then you have your int main, return 0. You have your basic skeleton with this thing right now with this thing. Let me walk you through this first problem as we read through this thing. So I want to toggle between the first one that says write a C++ program that declares an array size of 50. Well, that's probably the easiest thing we can do with this. So let me just copy this line right here that you can see that I'm going to actually declare an array size 50 with this type right now. Then I'm going to toggle inside of this thing, inside of my int main. I'm just going to comment that out, paste that in here. So tell me how you would declare this thing. This is size of double, and this is an array of alpha, as it says, and I need a size of what, 50? So just put that in square brackets like how I would declare that. Okay. The next thing I need to do is come outside of my int main. Now, right at the bottom, I'm going to write my first function. If you look at this first function that you have, and this first function that you have inside of this thing, is you're going to come in to this first function, and you're going to see that you're going to write an initialize function. This is probably the first function we're going to write, is this right here. I'm just going to snag this line right here, and we're going to come over here, and I'm going to comment this out. Inside of this thing, I want to do this so we can actually get some more room here. How's that? Okay. So to dissect this thing out a little bit with it. So let's look at this thing. Two types of function that we talked about. First one is a void, well, value and a void. Well, this one's going to have to be a void, and it's going to be called initialize. And you're going to actually bear with me. Just start with what you do know before when you construct this thing. Inside of this thing, you have to actually pass in, create the first 25. You want it to double itself as the count. And just to think about this thing is that it's going to start with element 0, right? So you're going to have to do count. You have to initialize count to equal to 0. Okay. Inside of that, let's do the first 25. 4. And I'm going to do count equal to 0. Count less than 25. Count increment. Okay. So inside of this right now, I need to square it. Means I want to take count, multiply with count with it, and all of this needs to equal what? Needs to equal the list that I'm about to do list in brackets of count in this thing. So this is what I'm talking about. It's the first 25 that I'm just going to double. Okay, the first 25 is going to equal to the square of its index. So this is count is equivalent to index. If you want to call this is index, this is in, I don't care how you want to call this thing, right? So in here I'm basically giving count as the word, same words, index with this. The second 25 I'm going to do for, I'm going to do count. This time count is going to equal to what? To 25. And that's going to actually hit 20. I'm going to do count less than what? Is the size. Now remember, you're writing this as a very generic, so you can actually reuse this method inside of this thing. So I'm going to increment count after that. So inside of this, what do I say? What do I say? I want 3 times the count, and all that is equal to list count. Okay? So that, all that is your first initialize function with this thing. Of course, I misspelled initialize here. Alright, so that's the initialize count with this thing. The second function, if you look at this, let me do this same block of method right here. I'm going to snag this thing down here, write down my, no, hang on, I'm going to write my function prototype. First, I write my function, copy this thing, come up to the top, place my function prototype in here with a semicolon. That's that. Third, I need to call this in here, right? So bear with me for a moment. So I need to call this thing. What's a function? How do I call this thing? Well, I need to go in. Let's look at this parameter right here. I need to pass in the first one as a data type of the double. It's a list, and that's your array that how you pass in with your, and the size is the next one. So passing in this order of the first one is a double and an int. Remember now, I don't really have to have a formal parameter, but I do need to have its data type with it. So up here inside of this, I'm going to call this function called initialize, paste that here, and then I'm going to actually put in this right now. I have to call this list is equivalent. Remember, these are data reference, address reference, parameter reference, that when we talk about reference parameter in chapter 6. So instead of the scope is to see list inside of this, inside of this I would see is what? Alpha. So alpha would be the actual parameter I'm going to call then, and the size is 50. That's the one actually I want to pass in here is size 50. Alright, now if you can please make the connection how I called this and what's been defined here, alright, is actually being used inside of this. Inside of my function between the curly brackets, list is the actual scope that I can only see in here. In my main, I cannot see list. I can only see alpha. So, but the sequence I'm passing in between list and alpha that's being here, it's the memory address of alpha. Okay? Now, that's one. The second one I need to look at is, if you look at the second definition of this thing, it says the last, and once you write an output of this thing, so what's an output? It's basically, it's a print, right? So let me just snag this line right here, copy that, come down here, block comment this thing, and then I'm going to come down here, I'm going to do a print is what? See, an output is what? Void function. I'm going to call it print. And I'm going to leave this open as well. Curly brackets, put down what we do know. That's what we do know, right? So we're going to actually run a loop again. It says this is going to be int count or index, however you want to call this. We're going to do a loop. I'm going to write this loop from the inside out so you can see what I'm talking about this thing. What do we want to output in this thing? I basically want to come across and read across after 10 columns. Remember now, 10 columns, right? Come across 10 columns. After the 10th one, I need for it to actually come across. But more important, I need some spaces in that column. I'm going to get a set width of like 4 spaces and then a blank line with this thing. So inside of this thing, by the end of the end line in this thing, so I just want to do a cout, watch. inline. So at the end of, I don't know, certain length when I pass in, that I want to actually print out a certain length after 10, for example. So how do I do that? I need to write a selection with this thing. The selection is something like an if, and I need to actually to do what? Count plus 1, and then I do a mod. Remember that mod? Find the remainder after 10. If I don't, and I do a logical operator with 0 with this thing, so that actually compares it. If it equals to 0 after the 10th column with this thing, I want it to actually to go down to the next line. For that to happen, I have to actually write a for loop. Inside the for loop, I start with a count equal to 0, and then I'm going to compare the count to the size. So in this case, up in the top, when I call the size, when I divide this out to 10, I want to update this right now with it. So here's what I would do is that. Okay, so inside the loop, what you're going to have one more. So I'm going to have a cout. I'm going to set W. Remember I set W? Starts over. I'm going to set this as 4. And then I'm going to output what? List. The count goes here. And then I'm going to give it a space between it. Okay, like that. So that will enable for me to do that outside this for loop. After it does this, what do? Remember how you have a cout inline? Okay, so this needs to happen right here with it. Alright, now inside of this thing I need to call the same parameter as I did on top. Double list square bracket int size, and when I initialize I need to actually call this function prototype. Come up here. Remember now, I didn't do this part, so I have for the top one, so let me do that right now with it. It's the same one with this thing. So that's what it looks like. Come down here. Inside of this thing, I need to call this function called print. Here's the print. Highlight that, copy that, come up to here, paste that here, and then I'm going to actually come in, I'm going to pass across as alpha, and then I'm going to do probably 50 as well. Okay. So when I compile this thing, you're going to see it should compile properly with this thing. Okay, so let me just snag this thing right now and